If you're new to this channel, you may not know that I enjoy writing horror stories. I've self-published 3 horror novels and recently got a horror short story officially published. So I thought, since Marvel Rivals is still popular, I would turn some characters from it into horror villains. But without further ado, on with the show. Greetings. My name is Ivan Tukil, the lead researcher of the Bakersville Detective Agency, dedicated to taking on cases that no one else will. Or at least the cases that no one else is insane enough to. Today I have 4 cases that I was forced to research, so let's get into it. The first case is actually very classified, and I probably shouldn't even be telling you, but funnily enough, I don't care. A few weeks ago, we were approached by an old man named Mr. Carter, who claimed that his wife, Peggy, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. He said that she had been a high-ranking researcher in the military. He had tried to ask her superiors what had happened to her, and they refused to tell him. So he decided to approach us, thinking that we could break into some highly classified military archives. Which of course we could, but he didn't know that. So we hacked into the archives and discovered that the secretive military sect, known as S.H.I.E.L.D., had recently discovered an old experiment of theirs from the Second World War. As everyone knows, during this period of history, both sides made several scientific advancements to try to one-up each other. One of the many experiments that the Allies tried during this war was the creation of a super soldier serum, which was essentially a steroid that could permanently place one at peak human performance. This experiment was tried on a young private named Steve Rogers, a fairly physically unimpressive man who had enlisted multiple times, but had been denied at every attempt due to his small size. However, after being injected with the super soldier serum, he became the most powerful soldier in the world. That was, until the crash. During his final mission, Rogers hijacked a plane, filled with bombs that were set to detonate. To keep them from harming anyone, he crashed the ship into the Arctic. For years, everyone had presumed him dead. However, 70 years later, operatives found his body encased in ice, barely clinging to life. However, he was no longer the same man that went into those waters. First, his body had greatly deteriorated, with many of his fingers, toes, and even his nose having succumbed to frostbite. However, as bad as his physical injuries were, his mental state was far worse. When he was revived, it was revealed that his time in the ice had cost him his sanity. He began seeing everyone around him as an enemy of war, and treated them as such, violently murdering them with his star-spangled shield. They tried to fight him off, but due to the super soldier serum still flowing through his blood, no wound they inflicted on him could permanently put him down. The only one able to stop him was Peggy Carter, who managed to trick him into trapping himself in a cryotube, freezing himself over once again. Though even she lost her life in this process. The government, wanting to cover all this up for obvious reasons, made up false rumors regarding the deaths of their scientists. As for Steve, he still sleeps in stasis, stored in some military bunker somewhere, waiting to be released upon the world. The next case we have today is much more domestic in nature. We were approached by local police from New York City to help them with a case. Over the past week, several students from the same high school had disappeared. There were no suspects, no bodies, they had simply vanished. Of course, we sent our best missing persons detective, Holly Pine. She began talking to several of the high schoolers whose friends had gone missing. Of all the witnesses that we interviewed, there was one that was most helpful in our investigation, a young redhead student named Mary Jane Watson. She had been in a romantic relationship with the first student to go missing, a boy named Peter Parker. However, something about Peter's disappearance felt different from the other missing teens. For one, everyone besides Peter had vanished without any warning. However, Mary Jane noticed that Peter had been acting somewhat strange for weeks before his disappearance. He was avoiding others more than usual, would often miss classes or extracurricular activities, and constantly looked as if he was on the verge of a panic attack. When asked how long Peter had been acting like this, MJ said she didn't quite know, but believed that it started around the same time as their class field trip to Oscorp Labs. At this point, the next step was obvious. I researched into Opposite Corp's lab projects, specifically trying to find anything that happened to be working on the day of the class's field trip. Of course, I found something. As it turns out, Oscorp had finished a new project, creating a radioactive spider. Why would pumping a spider full of radiation be in any way useful? I don't know. But for some reason they did it. As it turns out, the spider also managed to escape containment on the same day of the class field trip. From this point, the conclusion was somewhat obvious. Holly and MJ raided Peter's old house, and what they found was shocking. The bodies of the missing teens, all tangled up in giant blood-stained spider webs hanging from the ceiling. They were about to call for backup, but suddenly heard a loud thumping sound coming from the ceiling. They looked up and saw Peter Parker, now mutilated into a strange human and spider hybrid, with spider-like legs bursting from his back and mandibles tearing from his mouth. As it turns out, the radioactive spider that had bitten Peter had managed to alter his DNA. At first, the effects were harmless, if not legitimate superpowers. He had enhanced strength, could climb walls, and even had a precognitive sense that informed him of danger. These powers were cool for a week or so, but with little warning, Peter began to see his fellow man as prey. He began to hunger for human flesh, and even lost control a few times, killing some of his classmates. He tried to continue his normal life, but found it to be impossible. Seeing the danger he was now to others, he locked himself away in his home so he could never hurt anyone again. However, the isolation from his fellow man allowed the inner spider to take further control, and soon he had lost almost all of his humanity, both physically and mentally. MJ watched in horror as her former boyfriend tried to eat her alive. Fortunately, a well-placed gunshot to the head from Holly was enough to finally put him to rest. Now, you may have begun to notice a pattern in these stories of people going too far with science and reaping the consequences. And that pattern is one which will continue in this next story. This is slightly different, as the story does not originate from one case, but multiple cases that we now know are connected. Several reports were given to us, stating that they had been attacked by what witnesses claimed to resemble a giant, muscular, grayish-green man. Obviously, given that this is a very unique and consistent description, we figured that all these cases had the same perpetrator, but we didn't know exactly who or what. That was until recently. After months of research, we managed to find some archived military footage detailing a classified project led by a scientist named Bruce Banner. The man was put in charge of a series of experiments regarding gamma radiation, trying to find practical uses for it in warfare. For some reason, they decided to first test this by setting off a burst of gamma radiation in the middle of the Arizona desert. Fortunately, it was isolated from most of its civilians. Unfortunately, a random kid wandered into the blast zone. Fortunately, Banner was able to save the kid, but unfortunately, he was caught in the blast himself. Fortunately, Banner managed to survive. Unfortunately, something worse was about to occur. You see, Bruce Banner had had a tumultuous childhood, dealing with bullies at school and an abusive father at home. In this time, he turned his repressed rage into an alternate persona, one that had been hidden away for years. That was until the gamma radiation brought it to the surface. The scientists working with Banner brought him back to the military base, where they set him up in a makeshift hospital. However, when he woke in a burst of shock and fear, he began to change. His body began to contort, his muscles began to rapidly grow, green veins sprouted from his skin. His jaw burst from his face and hung low by his neck, with razor-sharp teeth bursting from his gums. His now mindless, rage-filled, hulking form then broke free of the room and killed every single being on the base. Soon after this, the monster transformed back into Banner, and, realizing what he had done, he quickly went on the run. He tried to avoid people for as much as possible, but would never be able to keep the monster inside him locked away for long. As yet, we have no idea where Banner is, or how we could even bring him down once we find him, but we must remain vigilant in our search. The last one I will divulge for you today is much more mysterious than our others, and we admittedly have little to no information on this creature. We received reports of several hikers, hunters, campers, and other wilderness explorer types going missing around the woods of Michigan. These had all been regarded as 411 disappearances and had not been investigated further by authorities. However, that has never stopped us before. Many of the witnesses who had watched their friends be murdered described a strange, semi-feminine squirrel-like creature. Obviously, these reports were thrown out by most investigators, but with the things we have seen, we did not even question it. Of course, we sent out our best detective, James Constantine, to investigate the nearby forests. To make a long story short, he did indeed find the creature, a human-squirrel hybrid, wearing leather, fur, and had white foam spewing from its mouth. However, it also had some abilities that we were not prepared for. On top of being strong, violent, and agile, it also had the ability to communicate with and control other squirrels in the area. Constantine barely made it out alive, the skin on his face and arms being scratched almost completely off of him. After this, we sent in several more well-armed teams to attempt to capture or destroy the creature, which we dubbed the Squo. However, no matter what we tried, she always seemed unbeatable. Welp, that was something. If you want to see more horror redesigns, comment below. But until then, goodbye, and I will remember you all in therapy.